Two sisters competing for awards and recognition in Hollywood. A sibling rivalry that spans 60 years in Hollywood and almost a century in their personal lives. One of the biggest feuds of all time and a recent lawsuit. This is Talk Hollywood to me. Hello and welcome to Talk Hollywood to me, where I talk Hollywood to you. If you missed our previous and first ever episode, I talked about the true father of film, Louis LaPrince, and his mysterious disappearance and possible murder. If you haven't checked that out, please be sure to. I'm Sierra, and I live for drama. Whether it's drama from celebrities in the past or celebrities now, or eavesdropping on a conversation I hear in Fisher, I love it all. And today's episode features a lot. Today I'll be covering a tale of two sisters, see what I did there, who had been competing against each other their whole lives. I'll be talking about Olivia De Havilland and Joan Fontaine, two fantastic actresses with a lot of beef. If you're wondering where you might have heard the name Olivia De Havilland before, I'll be getting to that later. Now, it is my goal to provide the most unbiased view of the story as I can, trying to take a neutral stance and using as many sources and quotes as I can to get the story from both sides. And I'll be getting to why I add this later. For now, let's jump right into the story and start from the beginning of their lives. Olivia De Havilland was the oldest of two, born July 1st, 1916 in Tokyo, Japan, to a British father and mother. Her father, Walter, was an English professor at Tokyo University, hence why she was born in Tokyo, as was Joan. 15 months after Olivia was born, Joan came into the picture. Their early life was troubling, due in part to the fact that their father was stepping out on their mom with geishas, and more specifically, the housemaid. Remind you of anyone? So in 1919, their mother Lillian separated from Walter, took the girls, and moved to California, the divorce being finalized in 1925. Joan's health, however, was another reason they moved to the United States. According to Fontaine's own memoir autobiography, No Bed of Roses, she developed anemia following a double attack of the measles and a streptococcus infection. The streptococcus bacteria, fun fact, is the parent bacteria per se of sepsis, pneumonia, and meningitis, just to name a few. So any one of those things combined with the measles, vaccinate your kids, isn't going to be fun, and neither is anemia. This led to the phrase of Livy can, Joan can't. Livy was the name of Olivia given to her by a young Joan and has continued to be her nickname since. The sisters also acted like regular sisters, and Olivia adored being the older sibling. Olivia said that Joan would climb into bed with her and ask her to tell her a story. Olivia would also master animal noises as a result of Joan having a broken cat toy that lost its voice. Whenever Joan would squeeze it, Olivia would meow, and Joan loved it. But of course, all siblings have their problems, especially if you have to share a room. Olivia said that was their biggest problem, though it's also said she hated having attention taken away from her because of Joan, the younger sister, and Joan felt Olivia got all the attention from their mom. While like all siblings, they played together, fights and quarrels were frequent. There would be slaps from Joan, hair pulling from Olivia, and Joan once accused Olivia of tearing up clothes so Joan wouldn't get them as hand-me-downs. Apparently, the quarreling began when Joan was still in a crib. Life magazine, in a 1942 profile of the sisters, gave this particularly interesting story. Quote, "At the age of 9, Joan decided she would kill her sister. She thought it all out carefully. She would let Olivia hit her once and then again in silence. But after the third blow, she would plug Olivia between the eyes. Now, I've had issues with my sister. We had slap fights, we wrestled, but I never once formulated a plan to kill her, to my knowledge, anyway. The worst thing I ever did was put hand sanitizer on her toothbrush, but I washed it off and called her homely when I was like 7, and I didn't even know what that word meant." Another particularly bad incident is when Joan was in the pool and trying to pull Olivia in. We've all been there. Olivia wasn't having any of it, and in the ensuing struggle, Joan ended up fracturing her collarbone on the edge of the pool. Now, according to Olivia, they were about 5 or 6 years old. In Joan's autobiography, she claims they were 15 or 16. It's also said that as they got older, the fighting became less physical and turned into something more psychological. Supposedly, Olivia, the editor of their high school newspaper, published a fake will in it and had said this, quote, "I bequeath to my sister the ability to win boys' hearts, which she does not have at present." Damn, they are the complete opposite of the sisters' number in White Christmas. Amidst all of this, a love of acting emerged in both of them. The blood of thespians ran through them, courtesy of their mother, a stage actress. One time as a child, Olivia had gone through her mother's stage makeup and put on eyeshadow, lipstick, and rouge. Her mother had spanked her and yelled at her to never do it again and never tell Joan. They both vied for attention from their mother, and it's entirely possible why acting became something they chose to pursue. But for Olivia, her passion for acting is the reason she left home, but perhaps not on the terms she wanted. In April 1925, after the divorce between Lillian and Walter was finalized, Lillian married department store owner George Milan Fontaine. Their childhoods after that were not great as a result, aside from the bullying of each other. Fontaine, nicknamed by Olivia as the Iron Duke, was a strict disciplinarian and enforced, as Joan called it, a quote-unquote military childhood that even came with khaki-colored beds. I myself am an army brat, and I thank God that my dad never did that to my sister and I. When one of the girls misbehaved, they had two options to choose between for punishment. Swallow cod liver oil, which induced vomiting, or have your shins beaten with a wooden hanger. Olivia had gone to school with bruised shins as a result of the Iron Duke's beatings, and though administrators had asked him to stop, he didn't. In 1933, when Joan was 16 years old, she left to go live in Japan with her father and attended the Tokyo School for Foreign Children, where she graduated in 1935. Olivia, meanwhile, began to star in stage plays. She had previously been made fun of by her classmates for her speaking style, pronouncing can't as cant and shan't as shant, but became the class clown and prankster. She brought forth what she learned from her elocution classes in her childhood and specialized in making animal noises. And eventually all the elocution and diction classes paid off. In 1933, a 17-year-old Olivia De Havilland starred in a local amateur production of Alice in Wonderland as Alice. She also starred in school plays such as The Merchant of Venice and Hansel and Gretel. Her stepfather was none too pleased with her dramatic extracurriculars and forbade her from it after a confrontation between the two. Then, Olivia learned she had bagged the lead role of Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet. It was a school fundraising production and Olivia was going to go through with it, but the Iron Duke had had enough. Either she could drop out of the production and stay home, or she could stay in the production but not come home. Olivia could not and would not let her friends and school down. So, she left home forever and moved in with a family friend. What followed after she graduated high school in 1934 quickly turned her dreams of being an English teacher into something more. She would become a movie star. While at Mills College in Oakland, she was offered the role of Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream. At the same time, Australian director Max Reinhardt came to the United States to see a different production of the same play at the Hollywood Bowl. By pure chance, an assistant of Reinhardt's had seen Olivia in the Saratoga Community Theater's production and offered her the role of second understudy for Hermia. 1 week before the play's premiere, both the understudy, Jean Roverall, and the lead actress, Gloria Stewart, dropped out of the production. Now it was up to Olivia, age 18, to play the part. It was a good thing that Max Reinhardt was as equally impressed as his assistant because he offered Olivia the part in the 4-week-long fall tour that followed. During the tour, Reinhardt received some good news from Warner Brothers. He was going to direct the film version of the stage performance and asked Olivia to play Hermia. Now, at this time, Olivia was set on becoming a teacher and was admittedly a bit hesitant. But with a little bit of convincing from Reinhardt and executive producer Henry Blank, Olivia agreed and signed a contract with Warner Brothers. And thus, her acting career began. It was also around this time Joan returned from Japan and found that her sister was soon going to become Hollywood's next big thing. Joan wanted to follow her sister and become an actress too, but Olivia first tried to send her to a finishing school. Olivia said, quote, "I thought San Francisco was superior, I really did. The art, the opera, the clubs, the balls. I thought the sophistication Joan gained from her time in Japan made her perfectly suited for high society, but she wasn't the slightest bit interested. Joan insisted, quote, 'I want to be doing what you're doing.'" Well, Joan didn't have much luck at first. Olivia didn't know how to drive, so Joan became her chauffeur. Sometime in 1935, Joan had made her stage debut in a West Coast production of the play Call It a Day, but her next project would be a movie, and for this, Joan was told to change her name. One night, Joan was waiting to pick Olivia up at the Warner Brothers studios when an employee of the studio said that she should be doing movies, and this man wanted to help make it happen. Joan brought it up to her mother, but she refused, saying Warner Brothers was Olivia's studio and not to try to pursue work there. Joan had to accept this reality, saying 2 De Havillands on the marquee would be too many, so I had to leave Olivia's distinguished name for her, and I took my stepfather's name. She was also supposedly helped along by a psychic who told her that Joan Fontaine is a success name. Thus, Joan de Havilland was no more. The marquise would read Joan Fontaine. Eventually, she got an agent and made her film debut in the MGM film No More Ladies, which also came out in 1935, and then in an independent film which came out 2 years later in 1937, A Million to One. That same year, she had a small uncredited role in Quality Street starring Katharine Hepburn. Quality Street was the first picture she filmed with the now-defunct RKO Pictures, rest in peace. The studio truly believed her to be the next big thing and styled her as such when in the credits for The Man Who Found Himself, her first starring role, she was called, quote, the new RKO screen personality. Fontaine, however, said the film had, quote, an A budget but a Z story. Still in 1937, she did another 2 pictures, You Can't Beat Love and Music for Madam. Then she was in A Damsel in Distress with Fred Astaire, which was his first RKO film without Ginger Rogers, whom he was paired with for 9 RKO films. The film, however, was a flop. In 1938, she starred in 2 comedies, Maid's Night Out and Blonde Cheat, and received top billings in both. Following those, she starred in Sky Giant and was borrowed by another studio to star in The Duke of West Point. 1938, meanwhile, was a good year for Olivia. She received great praise for her role as Hermia and starred in 2 small comedies after, Alibi Ike and The Irish in Us. Olivia wasn't a fan of the traditional heroine roles she kept being cast in and would end up becoming typecast for these roles. That same year in 1935, Warner Brothers decided to take a chance in producing the swashbuckling film Captain Blood, in which she starred alongside a then-unknown extra who would later have a prolific career, interesting personal life, and an equally interesting relationship with Olivia. It was none other than Errol Flynn. The film was a hit, received 4 Oscar nominations, and Olivia was given glowing reviews. She and Errol Flynn had incredible chemistry together, which is quite obvious. Olivia later admitted she had a crush on Errol Flynn throughout the whole production, and he had quite the crush on her. Their chemistry led to more collaborations, and they made 7 more movies together. 1 year later, she starred in the historical drama Anthony Adverse, for which she received good reviews. She also starred in another successful film with Errol Flynn that year, The Charge of the Light Brigade, and had re-signed her contract with Warner Brothers. In 1937, she would receive top billing for the first time in the comedy Call It a Day. If the name sounds familiar, it should. The movie was based on the play of the same name, the play where Joan Fontaine debuted. Though the film didn't do well, she also starred in It's Love I'm After that same year, which did well and earned her some praise. Olivia did 2 more period dramas that year, The Great Garrick, for which she received glowing reviews, and Gold Is Where You Find It. The next 2 years would prove to be the biggest years of her life. We're all familiar with the story of the heroic Robin Hood and his love Maid Marian, and that's the role Olivia de Havilland found herself in opposite Errol Flynn, as if there was any better option. The film, of course, was a success, popular at the box office and with critics, received an Oscar nomination for Best Picture, and is considered one of the best movies of the classic Hollywood era. And yet I got no thanks in my tech theater class junior year for providing them with dozens of screenshots for the film as reference photos for costumes. I at least hoped I would after having to clean out the girls' dressing room that was filled with silverfish. Trust me, they're a lot more annoying to deal with in real life than in Minecraft. Here's a fun little story, though, about the adventures of Robin Hood. It's no secret that Olivia and Errol had a great attraction to each other. Anyone that has seen any of their movies can tell this, and they've said it themselves. There was such a great attraction that Errol Flynn told Olivia one day that his current marriage to Lily Demita was over and that they should get married. Olivia, ever the cautious one, said that he should get all of that straightened out first if the divorce proceedings were going to go through, and after everything was finalized, then they could go ahead and get hitched. One day, Lily Demita showed up on set. If you're thinking an incredible fight broke out, you'd be wrong. But I can and will say some extraordinary pettiness on Olivia's behalf did show up. It was very clear that their marriage was far from over, so Olivia had an idea. In her own words, quote, I thought, oh well, I'm going to torture Errol Flynn, that's what I'm going to do. And so we had one kissing scene, which I looked forward to with great delight. I remember I'd ruin every take at least 6 in a row, maybe 7, maybe 8, and we had to kiss all over again. And Errol Flynn got really rather uncomfortable, and he had, if I may say so, a little trouble with his tights. What an icon, truly. And when Errol Flynn tried to join the war after becoming a naturalized American citizen in 1942, he was rejected because he had, amongst other things, various venereal diseases. That has no ties to the story, I just think it's wild. Anyway, despite the success of 1938's The Adventures of Robin Hood, Olivia de Havilland's newfound stardom and star power wasn't shown in her subsequent roles. After starring in the romantic comedies For's a Crowd and Hard to Get, Olivia was starting to have some doubts about her future at Warner Brothers. She was more suited to period pieces and dramatic roles, stronger roles. That was her background, after all. Though her next film, and again with Errol Flynn, 1939's Dodge City, was a success, Olivia said of the role, quote, "I was in such a depressed state I could hardly remember my lines." She was at a low point. She was having doubts about her career. Only a miracle could bring her back out. Meanwhile, Joan played a love interest in 1939's Gunga Din, and though it was popular, her role was small. She then starred in Man of Conquest and The Women, both small roles. It would take another year for Joan to get the big and great recognition she wanted. If only she hadn't shown up to an audition all dressed up for George Cukor. 1939 was a great year for movies. Dark Victory, Ninotchka, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, The Wizard of Oz, Goodbye Mr. Chips, Stagecoach, Wuthering Heights, Love Affair, Of Mice and Men. But this film was the most spectacular and important. The film that, adjusted for inflation, is the highest grossing movie of all time. Gone with the Wind. While a great movie, it also had a great many problems before, during, and after its filming, which I'll talk about in another episode because boy was there a lot. Joan Fontaine had made a mistake. George Cukor, the original director of Gone with the Wind before being fired, had worked with Joan on The Women. He called Joan in to go for the role of Melanie. Joan recounts this event. Quote, "I made a tremendous mistake and I have regretted it always. Because with George Cukor, I wore some rather chic clothes. He said, 'Oh, you're much too stylish for the role that I want you to do.' And I said, 'Well, how about my sister?' And he said, 'Who's your sister?' I explained, and he said, 'Thank you.' And that's how Olivia got that role." Now, Olivia recalls things a bit differently and has made no mention of that story, either because, one, it didn't happen at all, or two, she wants people to believe she got the role on her own, and not through her sister or anyone else for that matter. What most likely happened was this. David O. Selznick, who was producing Gone with the Wind, had written a letter to a colleague in November 1938 that said, quote, "I would give anything if we had Olivia de Havilland under contract to us so we could cast her as Melanie." At the time of the studio era, if you were signed to a studio, you could only make movies with that studio. One studio could ask another to lend them one of their actors for a film if they really wanted them, but this was a very tricky process and typically didn't happen. But it did here. George Cukor called Olivia one day completely out of the blue. Olivia said, quote, "Selznick had seen me in Robin Hood and thought I should be considered. One day George Cukor called me out of the blue and said, 'You don't know me, but would you be interested in playing in Gone with the Wind?' Naturally, I said a big yes, and then he whispered into the phone, 'Would you consider doing something illegal?' The plan was this. Olivia would come in and secretly read for the role of Melanie with Cukor and Selznick. If they felt she was right for the part, they would cast her and find a way to make things work with Jack Warner. Jack Warner wasn't willing at all, not in the slightest, to lend Olivia over to Selznick, so Olivia went right to the top, his wife. She was able to get Jack Warner's wife and to convince Jack to loan her out to Selznick for Gone with the Wind, and convinced he was. Olivia went to Selznick. Gone with the Wind, as we all know, was a critical and commercial success and swept the Oscars, winning 10 of the 15 awards it was nominated for. For the record, Clark Gable didn't win Best Actor, Olivia didn't win Best Supporting Actress, but Hattie McDaniel did and made history as the first African-American to win an Oscar. And it did win for Best Visual Effects, Best Music, Original Score, and Best Sound Recording. Olivia was, admittedly, very upset about her loss. During a pre-party, Selznick got a call. He was being notified in advance who the award winners were, and Olivia wasn't one of them. After it was said that Vivien Leigh, Scarlett, Clark Gable, Rhett, and Hattie, Mammy, were the winners, they were rushed out and away in a limo to where the event was being held. Meanwhile, Olivia was left behind in the dust and had to be taken separately. Olivia was left to sit at a separate table with Selznick's wife, Irene, who drove her, and Robert Bentley, a newspaper columnist who worked for Vanity Fair and The New Yorker. Away at a higher table was Selznick with his little band of winners, minus McDaniel, who was segregated from the others. Olivia tried to maintain calm and collected, but that didn't work. Quote, "No one uttered a word of condolence to me. I tried to do the English thing, stiff upper lip. But when Irene saw one single tear sliding down my cheek, she rushed me into the hotel kitchen. Next to the steaming cauldron of soup, I cried my eyes out. That soup turned out saltier than the chef had planned. I went home in one of David's limos. All I could do was think to myself, there is no God." For 2 weeks, Olivia was upset and had fallen into feelings of deep despair and misery, but after those 2 weeks, she was right back up. She had had an epiphany. She lost because she wasn't meant to be in the Best Supporting Actress category. She wasn't supporting. She was a star, too. The way things happened was of Selznick's own doing. Vivian was meant to take the Best Actress Oscar, and Hattie was supporting, but the better of the two. It was part of the system. After she realized this, she thought, quote, there was a God after all. Joan, meanwhile, was about to meet her sister there, along with her new husband, whom Olivia had previously dated. In 1940, Joan starred as the second Mrs. De Winter in the film adaptation of Rebecca opposite Laurence Olivier. Selznick wanted to press some of his luck a bit further and try and get Olivia for the role, but Jack Warner wasn't as easy to persuade this time. Instead, he asked Olivia, would you mind if I take your sister? Olivia was fine with it, even though she was upset she was losing a brilliant part, adding, quote, she was really better for it than I was. She was blonde, Larry was brunette. This is the year that Joan Fontaine got her first Best Actress Oscar nomination, though she lost to Ginger Rogers and Kitty Foyle, which was also a very great movie and a very great role. 1941 is when it all came together. Olivia De Havilland had been suspended twice by rejecting many scripts sent her way. She was getting tired of playing the same woman over and over again, the same story over and over again. That year, she starred in 3 commercially successful films, The Strawberry Blonde, Hold Back the Dawn, and They Died with Their Boots On, her last film collaboration with Errol Flynn. Hold Back the Dawn is what got her what she had been waiting for, a Best Actress nomination. Joan Fontaine was back 1 year later in another Hitchcock feature co-starring Cary Grant, Suspicion, and she got it again, a Best Actress nomination. Joan didn't plan on going to the ceremony because she felt that if she didn't win for Rebecca, which she felt was a better film, then she wasn't going to win for Suspicion. When she saw Olivia show up on set of the movie Joan was working on with a dress in hand, she decided to go. It was now 1942, Oscars night. Because the Oscars were also styled like a large formal dinner at the time, the sisters were sat at the same table. Only one would come out on top tonight. In No Bed of Roses, Joan wrote the following, quote, I stared across the table where Olivia was sitting directly opposite me. Get up there, Olivia whispered commandingly. Now what had I done? All the animus we'd felt toward each other as children, the hair pullings, the savage wrestling matches, the time Olivia fractured my collarbone, all came rushing back in kaleidoscopic imagery. My paralysis was total. I felt Olivia would spring across the table and grab me by the hair. I felt age 4 being confronted by my older sister. Damn it, I'd incurred her wrath again. Though it's also written that when Joan's name was announced, Olivia was ecstatic and had shouted, "We've got it." And according to her biographer, Joan rejected her attempts at congratulating her, and it left Olivia feeling offended and embarrassed. But Joan ignoring Olivia's congratulations when she went up to receive her award was something that would come back to bite her later on. Things remained relatively silent between them for a time. On the night before Joan's wedding to Brian Aherney, way back in 1939, Olivia's ex, Joan danced with Howard Hughes, whom Olivia was dating at the time. Hughes said to Joan that she should marry Aherney and tried to convince her not to because Hughes himself wanted to marry her. Joan, quite surprised, told her sister, but Olivia didn't seem to believe, or at the very least didn't want to believe her at all. This didn't help in the long run. Olivia married for the first of 2 times in 1946 to Marcus Goodrich, who was a journalist, Navy veteran, and the author of a novel, Delilah. Joan didn't have very many good words for him or about him. She remarked, quote, all I know about him is that he's had 4 wives and written 1 book. Too bad it's not the other way around. 1 year later, in 1947, Olivia finally got her Oscar for 1946's To Each His Own and would win a second one for 1949's The Heiress. Joan was backstage, waiting to congratulate her sister on her win. But when Olivia was confronted with her, she ignored Joan completely and left. According to Daily Variety, Olivia had said to her press agent, quote, I don't know why she does that when she knows how I feel, and that Joan, quote, stood there looking after her with a bewildered expression and then shrugged her shoulders and walked off. Joan later wrote, quote, I went over to congratulate her as I would have done to any winner. She took one look at me, ignored my hand, clutched her Oscar, and wheeled away. Olivia's press agent, Henry Rogers, told the press that, quote, the girls haven't spoken to each other for 4 months. Miss De Havilland had no wish to have her picture taken with her sister. This goes back for years and years, ever since they were kids. A case of 2 sisters who don't have a great deal in common. The relationship after this is called different things by different sources. Some say it was hot and cold, which it was for a lot of their life, but they still remained friendly and talked and visited each other. After Joan separated from her second husband in 1952, Olivia came to visit her at her New York apartment frequently. They spent at least one Christmas together. They were photographed laughing together in 1967 at a party for Marlene Dietrich. Joan visited Olivia at the latter's apartment in Paris. Olivia had divorced Goodrich in 1953 and had remarried Frenchman Pierre Gallant in 1955. If there hadn't been a widely spoken and openly acknowledged estrangement before, there was going to be a big one in 1975. Olivia De Havilland had cancer. The sisters wanted to do different things. Olivia wanted to consult other doctors and treatments. Joan did not. And while Joan was on the road with Cactus Flower, Olivia was apparently by her mother Lillian's side until the end. According to her, she dressed her mother up, gave her pedicures, beauty treatments, read to her from the Book of Common Prayer, and tried to keep her spirits high until the very end. According to Joan, who was overseas at the time, no one called to tell her that her mother was asking for her and that she wasn't notified of her mother's death, nor was she invited to the memorial service, which she only found out about by pure happenstance. After a lot of calls were made and threatening to spill all of the beans to the press, the service was delayed long enough for Joan to come and be part of it. What makes things worse, to Joan at least, is that she wasn't consulted about what her mother wanted done with her body, which was to be cremated. According to Joan, quote, Olivia and the executor of the estate took full charge, disposing of mother's effects as well as her body. She was cremated without bothering to consult me. And at the service, the sisters did not speak a word to each other. Quote, Olivia scattered a handful of ashes, then silently passed the container to me. Thus I said goodbye to my mother. As for Olivia, I had no words at all. The final nail in the coffin was Joan's autobiography, No Bed of Roses, which was dubbed by Olivia as, quote, no shred of truth. Joan did not hold back about how she really felt. In an interview with People magazine during her promotion of the book, she said, quote, you can divorce your sister as well as your husband's. I don't see her at all, and I don't intend to. She also declared, I got married first, got an Academy Award first, had a child first. If I die, she'll be furious because Olive got there first. Joan, in a way, was right. She was the first to die, and passed away in her sleep on December 15, 2013 from natural causes, aged 96. The sibling feud had finally ended. Olivia released a statement regarding this news saying she was, quote, shocked and saddened. On July 1st, 2016, Olivia De Havilland turned 100. In an interview for it, she said, quote, a feud implies continuing hostile behavior between two parties. I cannot think of a single instance wherein I initiated hostile behavior. She added, on my part, it was always loving but sometimes estranged and, in later years, severed. In an article from The Hollywood Reporter published 2 days after Joan's death, reporter Scott Feinberg had recounted a conversation with Joan over the phone and had asked about the supposed feud. Joan replied, this Olivia feud has always irritated me because it has no basis. To this day, it has no basis. She also said, let me just say, Olivia and I have never had a quarrel. We never had any dissatisfaction. We never had any hard words. And all this is press. Admittedly, it's hard to figure out what's true and what isn't. Gossip columnists in their heyday, like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, loved to stir things up, stir the pot, create drama. Hollywood was a big fan of twisting things for good publicity, and still is, really. Stories of two feuding sisters would send people to get newspapers and magazines and send them to the movies. Then again, there's also much evidence pointing towards that the feud was genuine, which is most of what I've already talked about. But even if this is the case, Olivia doesn't seem to hold any ill will towards her sister, at least in her later years. In fact, what she said or didn't say about Joan is why she sued FX. Feud Betty and Joan was something I'd been meaning to get around to when I heard it announced and it started airing, but I never really did. However, I did get more interested in visiting at least one part of it. On June 30th, 2017, one day before her 101st birthday, Olivia filed a lawsuit against the show and said the show's characterization damaged her professional reputation for integrity, honesty, generosity, self-sacrifice, and dignity. She was not consulted, though Ryan Murphy had said he was nervous to call because he didn't want to bombard her with so many questions, nor had she given them permission to use her likeness. All of this was settled in January of this year when the Supreme Court refused to hear the case because, yes, it did go that far. At the end of the day, all we have is what the sisters themselves have said and what is known to the others who are privy to that information. Aside from family members that may have been told about it by Olivia, everyone else that knew anything has taken it with them to the afterlife. Unless Kirk Douglas happened to be one, in which case he is still alive and currently 102 years old, much like Olivia, who doesn't look 102 at all, in my opinion. As for Kirk, well, you can decide that on your own. But whether the entire feud was fabricated just for publicity or if it was all true or most possibly a mixture between truth and make-believe, it makes for an interesting story either way. I just hope that Olivia over in France doesn't catch wind of this podcast and find fault and try to sue me. Mr. Havilland, if you're listening, I was just joking. Seriously, please don't sue me. I love your work. And that's the end of our second episode of Talk Hollywood to Me. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. I greatly appreciate it. Drama is always so much fun to talk about, and I love talking about these sisters today. While there are many things already out there, the sisters might still have had some skeletons in their closet, but hopefully not real ones like the ones they used in the 1982 movie Poltergeist. Yep, next time I'll be talking about haunted or supposedly haunted and or cursed movie sets just in time for it not being Halloween. From Poltergeist to The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby to The Omen, I'm going to talk about the sets and stars that were subjected to terror and maybe it even killed them. Ooh, spooky. If you like this episode, first of all, thank you. And second of all, be sure to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you want to listen to more of the podcast here on Hawkstream Radio, you can visit our website at uncwtealtv.org/Hawkstream and get them there. Once again, thank you all so much for listening. I'm Sierra, and this has been Talk Hollywood to Me, where I talk Hollywood to you. Have a fantastic day.